The bell above the cafe door chimed softly. Warm sound, cold night. Hudson stepped inside, and the heat hit him like a memory he didn't deserve. The place was small, but alive. Golden lights, the scent of cinnamon, shelves of worn books, snow melting quietly off coats near the entrance. Laughter in low tones, a soft song playing in the background. The kind of warmth you only find in a town that still believes people can start over. And then, he saw her. Brooke stood behind the counter with her sleeves rolled up, hair loosely tied back, cheeks flushed from work, a pen tucked behind her ear like she belonged to a life that didn't include heartbreak anymore. She looked steady, whole, like she had learned to carry joy without asking permission. Hudson's breath caught so hard it hurt, because this wasn't the woman he left. This was the woman who survived him. Brooke lifted her eyes and met his just once, and the world went quiet inside Hudson's chest. No tears, no shock, no dramatic rage, just a calm that felt like a verdict. Hudson tried to speak, but his throat refused. Brooke's voice came first, soft, controlled, almost gentle. Hudson. His name on her lips sounded like a door closing. He nodded like a man who had walked into his own punishment. He started, but the words collapsed. Brooke watched him for a long beat, then said the sentence that nearly knocked the air out of him. You came back too late. Hudson felt something inside him crack, sharp and final, because he realized he had imagined her pain for years, but he had never imagined her peace, and that peace was what almost destroyed him. Stay until the end, because when Hudson finally learns what he did to Brooke, you'll understand why her forgiveness costs more than love. Subscribe and comment. I choose love. Winter arrived early that year, the kind that made the mornings look pale and unfinished. Brooke loved it anyway. She said the cold made people honest, because your breath showed the truth even when your mouth tried to hide it. On the morning everything began to unravel, she stood in the kitchen wearing one of Hudson's old sweaters, stirring oatmeal as snow ticked softly against the window. The house smelled like cinnamon and warmth, like small promises kept. Hudson came in behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing his face into her hair as if he was trying to memorize her. Brooke laughed and pushed him away, but her smile stayed. You're quiet, she said when she turned around. Hudson's eyes were on her, but they were far away, like something heavy lived behind them. He forced a small grin, reached for the mug she'd made him, and hid the tremble in his fingers by tightening his grip. Brooke noticed anyway. She always noticed. Hudson, she whispered, softer now because tenderness was her first language. What's going on? He lifted his shoulders as if he could shrug off whatever was squeezing his ribs. Work, he said. Just work. Brooke had learned the difference between a man who was tired and a man who was running. Hudson had been running for weeks. At first it was subtle. Late nights, distracted answers, the way he'd flinch when his phone buzzed. Then it became obvious. He stopped talking about the future. The future used to be their favorite place to live. They used to build it in sentences while curled on the couch, names for dogs, a tiny house with a porch swing, a trip to the mountains when they could afford it. Now, whenever she tried to bring it up, Hudson's eyes darkened like storm clouds, and Brooke's heart began to feel cold even inside warm rooms. That afternoon, Brooke found him sitting on the edge of their bed, tie loosened, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. The bedroom light was dim, the sky outside bruised with coming snow. Brooke leaned against the doorframe and watched him, unsure if her voice would make him shatter. Did something happen? She asked. Hudson looked up fast, like he'd forgotten she existed for a second. His face softened when he saw her and pain flickered there. Raw, involuntary. He opened his mouth, closed it, then stood abruptly. Nothing happened, he said too quickly. I'm fine. Don't do that, Brooke said. Her voice didn't shake, but her chest did. Don't say you're fine when your eyes look like you're drowning. Hudson's jaw clenched. He walked past her toward the hallway, but Brooke stepped in front of him, small but unmoving. She wasn't begging. She was asking for the truth like it was something she deserved. Talk to me, she pleaded. I'm not your enemy. Hudson's eyes flashed with something like fear. That's the problem, he whispered. You never were. Brooke's stomach tightened. What does that mean? She asked, and the question sounded like it came from a younger version of herself, one who still believed love was always safe. Hudson dragged a hand through his hair, pacing once, twice, like a trapped animal. My dad called, he said finally. The name alone pulled a shadow into the room. Hudson's father was a man made of expectations and cold applause. He wants me in Chicago, Hudson added. Full-time, a promotion, a real position. Brooke's heart leaped, then sank. That's good, she said carefully. Isn't it? Hudson laughed once, sharp and bitter. It would be if I was the kind of man he wanted. Brooke stepped closer, reaching for his hand. You don't have to become him, she said. Hudson pulled away, not from her touch but from what it demanded. Courage. His phone buzzed on the dresser. Hudson glanced at it and something in his face snapped shut. He turned the screen down like hiding it could erase the pressure. Brooke's eyes narrowed, quiet and steady. Who is that? She asked. Hudson didn't answer, and that silence was the first crack. Snow started that night. Thick, soft, relentless. Brooke cooked dinner, trying to pretend the air wasn't heavy. Hudson sat across from her, barely eating, staring past her shoulder as if the wall held answers. Every time his phone buzzed, his shoulders tensed. Brooke's fork paused mid-air. Hudson, she said, calm but firm. Look at me. He did. And the moment their eyes met, Brooke saw it. The decision already forming, the goodbye already written. Her throat tightened. You're leaving, she whispered. It wasn't a question. Hudson's silence was. I don't want to, he said, and his voice broke on the words. Brooke's eyes burned. Then don't, she whispered back. Stay. Fight. Choose us. Hudson's hands curled into fists. His shoulders rose with a breath that sounded like surrender. You don't understand, he said. I can't. You can, she interrupted, standing now, palms pressing the table like she could hold the world steady. You're choosing not to. Hudson's face tightened like her truth was a knife. Brooke, he started, and then he stopped, because he had no argument strong enough to justify abandonment. They went to bed with inches of space between them. Brooke lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, listening to Hudson's breathing as if counting it could keep him there. She wanted to reach for him. She wanted to ask for reassurance, but something stubborn in her refused to beg. In the darkness, Hudson turned toward her, and for a moment, his hand hovered near her shoulder. Brooke held her breath, waiting for touch, for apology, for a promise. But his hand fell back to the mattress, empty, and Brooke realized he was already gone, even while still beside her. At 2:17 a.m., Brooke heard the soft creak of floorboards. Her eyes opened instantly. Hudson moved quietly, pulling on a coat, moving like a man trying not to be seen. Brooke sat up, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Hudson? She whispered. He froze. For a long second he didn't turn. When he finally did, his face was pale, haunted, like the man in the mirror wasn't him. Go back to sleep, he said softly. Brooke's throat tightened. Where are you going? She asked. Hudson's lips parted, but no words came. In the dim light from the hallway, Brooke saw the envelope in his hand, sealed, heavy, final. You're not even going to say it, she whispered, voice cracking. You're just leaving? Hudson's eyes glistened, and he swallowed hard. If I stay, I'll ruin you, he said. And the sentence sounded like a lie he needed to believe. Brooke stepped out of bed, barefoot on the freezing floor, closing the distance between them. You're already ruining me, she said, quiet and lethal, because you're making me feel like I'm not worth the truth. Hudson's face crumpled for a second, like her words reached something human in him. He lifted a hand and brushed her cheek with his knuckles, a touch so tender it felt cruel. You deserve better than me, he whispered. Brooke's eyes filled. Don't say that, she begged. Don't turn your cowardice into something noble. Hudson flinched as if struck, because she was right. The snow outside pressed against the windows like time. Hudson's chest rose and fell uneven. I'm sorry, he breathed, and it sounded like goodbye. Brooke grabbed his wrist. Not hard, just enough to make him feel her pulse against his skin. "Stay," she whispered, the word breaking apart. "Even if you're afraid, even if you don't know how, just stay." Hudson closed his eyes. For a moment, Brooke felt him hesitate. Felt the man he could have been fighting to surface. Then his phone buzzed again. Hudson's eyes snapped open, terror flashing. He pulled his wrist free gently as if Brooke was something fragile he couldn't afford to touch. "I can't," he said. "Please, don't make this harder." Brooke's breath shook. "You're the one making it impossible," she whispered. Hudson stepped backward toward the door, and every step felt like a betrayal. Brooke followed him, not because she wanted to chase, but because she needed to witness it, to know she wasn't imagining the end. At the doorway, Hudson paused. His shoulders trembled. He looked at her like she was the only good thing he'd ever touched. "I loved you," he whispered. Brooke's tears spilled. "Love doesn't leave," she said. "Love stays and faces consequences." Hudson's jaw clenched. "I'm not strong enough," he admitted. And that confession hurt worse than any insult. He opened the door. Cold air rushed in, slicing through the warmth of their home like a knife. Snow swirled into the entryway, catching in Brooke's hair. Hudson stepped onto the porch, and for a moment he turned as if he might come back, like he might choose differently at the last second. Brooke held still, shaking, her heart screaming in silence. But Hudson didn't move. He lifted the envelope slightly like a man raising a shield, then lowered it again, and without another word, he walked down the steps into the snow. Brooke stood in the doorway until his taillights disappeared into the white night. Her legs finally gave and she sank onto the floor, fingers pressed to her mouth to stop the sound of her own sobbing. The house was too quiet, too big without him. Her chest hurt like it had been ripped open, and she hated herself for still loving him, even now. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw something, but all that came was silence. Thick and suffocating. Outside, snow covered the footprints Hudson left behind, erasing proof like the world didn't care. In the hours before morning, Brooke didn't sleep. She sat by the window wrapped in his sweater, staring at the road as if staring could undo abandonment. Her phone lay in her lap like a lifeline, screen dark and cruel. She typed his name once, twice, then erased it. Pride and pain battled inside her until she could barely breathe. Finally, she whispered into the empty house, voice trembling with a faith she didn't know she had. "God, don't let this be what destroys me." Snow fell softly outside, indifferent, but somewhere deep in Brooke's chest a small, stubborn ember flickered, tiny, wounded, and alive. Morning came like nothing had happened. Snow still clung to the windowsill. The kettle still whistled when Brooke turned the stove on out of habit. For a few seconds, just a few, her body moved through routine as if love hadn't been ripped out of the house in the middle of the night. Then she saw the empty hook by the door where Hudson's coat used to hang. Her chest tightened so fast she had to grip the counter. The air felt thinner, colder, sharper. And the silence. God, the silence wasn't quiet. It was loud enough to bruise. Brooke checked her phone with trembling fingers, half expecting to see a message that would make the night feel like a misunderstanding. Nothing. She refreshed the screen like it could bring him back. Nothing. She called once, then again, straight to voicemail, each ring a new insult. "Hudson," she whispered when the beep came and her voice sounded wrong in the empty room. "Please, just tell me you're okay." She hung up before she could cry, because crying felt like admitting he had the power to break her. But the truth was, he already had. By noon, she had convinced herself there must be a reason. A crisis, an emergency. Something that would justify the kind of disappearance that only villains did. She drove to his office with snow still melting off her hood, rehearsing calm words in her head. "I'm not angry. I'm just scared. Tell me the truth." The receptionist looked at her with sympathy that made Brooke's stomach sink. "He's not here," the woman said gently. He left town." Brooke blinked, lips parting. "Left town?" she echoed. The words sounded unreal, like a language she didn't speak. She walked out of that building on legs that didn't feel like hers. The wind hit her face and stole her breath, and suddenly the world looked too bright, Too normal for the way her heart was splitting. In the parking lot, she sat in her car and stared at the steering wheel until her vision blurred. Her mind replayed the night over and over. The envelope in his hand, the way his voice broke on "I'm sorry," the door opening, the cold rushing in. Brooke pressed a hand to her mouth and swallowed a sob so hard her throat burned. She wasn't ready to accept that this was real. She still believed love deserved an explanation. She drove to Hudson's mother's house next, because desperation always sends you to the places you swore you'd never go. Mrs. Callahan opened the door wearing a cardigan and worry, eyes widening the moment she saw Brooke's face. "Oh, honey," she breathed, like she already knew. Brooke's voice came out small. "Where is he?" she asked. "Please." Mrs. Callahan hesitated, and that hesitation was its own answer. "He's in Chicago," she said softly. "With his father." Brooke's hands shook. "Did he say anything? Did he leave a message?" The older woman's eyes filled. "Not for you," she whispered, and Brooke felt herself fall. Brooke walked back to her car without saying goodbye. She didn't trust herself to speak, because if she opened her mouth, grief would spill out like blood. She sat behind the wheel and stared at the world through a windshield dusted with snow. People passed by carrying groceries. Someone laughed across the street. Life kept moving, like her pain was nothing. Brooke gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles went white. "Not for you." Those words echoed in her skull. Not a note. Not a call. Not a goodbye. Just absence, like she was something that could be erased. That night, she didn't turn on any lights. She sat on the couch wrapped in his sweater, staring at the dark television screen like it could show her an ending that made sense. Her phone lay on the cushion beside her, silent as a stranger. She refused to text him again, because she could already hear the humiliation in her own voice. But at 11:48 p.m., loneliness won. She opened their message thread and typed, "Just tell me why." She stared at the words until her eyes burned, then erased them. Pride fought pain inside her until she could barely breathe. Finally, she typed one sentence and hit send before she could stop herself. "Are you safe?" The message delivered. No reply. Days turned into a week. The snow melted and fell again. Brooke went to work with red eyes and a forced smile, moving like a ghost through conversations. People asked if she was okay, and she learned to say "I'm fine" with the same emptiness Hudson used. At night, she lay in bed staring at the spot where he used to sleep, listening to the house creak like it was morning too. She dreamed of him walking back in, apologizing, holding her face like he used to. Then she woke up to cold sheets and silence. Each morning felt like a punishment she hadn't earned. On the 8th day, a package arrived. Brooke's hands shook as she carried it inside, heart racing, because for one desperate second she thought it might be from Hudson. It was just a random delivery she didn't remember ordering. Something small she'd forgotten about. A detail from a life that no longer existed. She stared at the box, then laughed once, sharp and broken, because even the mail was mocking her hope. She slid down the wall to the floor and pressed her forehead to her knees. Her sobs came silent at first, then violent, shaking her ribs like her body had finally run out of strength to pretend. She cried until she couldn't breathe, and still he didn't call. The first time Brooke saw him online, it wasn't even on purpose. She was scrolling mindlessly, trying to drown her thoughts in noise, when a photo flashed on the screen. Hudson in a suit, standing beside his father, the city lights behind them. A caption underneath talked about a new chapter and big moves. Brooke's stomach rolled. Her hands went cold. It was like watching someone smile over your grave. She stared at his face, clean, composed, successful, and couldn't reconcile it with the man who had held her at night and promised forever. The betrayal wasn't just that he left. It was that he looked untouched by it. That night she drove to the river and parked where Hudson used to take her when she couldn't sleep. Snow dusted the railing. The water moved dark and relentless beneath the ice. Brooke gripped the steering wheel and stared at the black surface as if it could swallow her pain. For a terrifying moment, she understood how people disappeared, not out of drama, but out of exhaustion. Her throat tightened with a quiet, dangerous thought. If I vanish, at least the waiting stops. She pressed her fingers against her pulse, grounding herself, shaking. No, she whispered out loud. Not like this. Her voice sounded like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. She went home and found Hudson's envelope tucked in the side drawer of his nightstand, the one she hadn't had the courage to open. Her breath hitched as she pulled it out, feeling the weight of it in her palm. The seal was unbroken. Brooke stared at it, tears blurring her vision. Part of her wanted to rip it open and let the words destroy her properly. Another part wanted to throw it into the fireplace and pretend none of it mattered. She held it for a long time, shaking, then slid it back into the drawer. I won't let your words control me, she whispered. Not anymore. It wasn't victory, but it was the first boundary. 2 weeks in, Brooke stopped wearing his sweater. It felt like progress and betrayal at the same time. She folded it carefully, placed it in a box, and sealed it like a burial. Her hands trembled, but her chin lifted. She cleaned the house like she was scrubbing away ghosts. She moved furniture. She changed the sheets. She opened windows despite the cold, letting winter air slice through rooms that had been suffocating her. She told herself she wasn't erasing him. She was saving herself. Still, when she sat down at the end of the day, the loneliness hit just as hard. Healing, she realized, wasn't a straight line. It was a war fought quietly. There were moments Brooke almost broke and called him again. Like when her car wouldn't start and she instinctively reached for her phone because Hudson always fixed things. Like when a jar wouldn't open and she laughed at herself, then cried because she had no one to share the laugh with. Like when she passed the diner and saw the booth where they used to sit, his hand always finding her knee under the table. Every memory was a knife wrapped in velvet. Friends told her she deserved better. Brooke nodded like she believed them, but at night she still whispered his name into the dark as if it could answer. One evening, Brooke walked into the small church near Main Street without planning to. The doors were unlocked, warm light spilling out into the cold. Inside, the sanctuary was empty. She sat in the back pew and stared at the cross, hands clenched in her lap. For a long time, she said nothing. Then her breath broke, and her voice came out in a whisper that felt like surrender and rebellion all at once. God, and I don't know how to carry this, she said. Tears slid down her face, hot against cold skin. I don't know what I did wrong. She swallowed hard. But don't let this turn me bitter. Don't let this kill what's good in me. The silence didn't answer, but it held her. When Brooke stepped outside, snow had started falling again. Soft, quiet, almost gentle. She stood on the church steps and watched the flakes drift under the streetlight, the world turning white like a blank page. Something in her chest loosened. Not healed, not yet, but loosened. She realized she had been waiting for Hudson to come back so she could start living again. And that waiting was slowly destroying her. Brooke exhaled, long and shaky, and said the words that terrified her more than loneliness. I'm done waiting. Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. It sounded like the beginning of strength. The next morning, she applied for a promotion she'd been too scared to pursue before. She signed up for a weekend course on small business planning, hands sweating as she typed her name into the form. The idea felt ridiculous, Brooke owning something of her own. But the thought also sparked a strange heat in her chest. She started writing down dreams she'd once dismissed as too much. A cozy cafe, books, warm lights, a place where people could breathe. She didn't know if it would work. She didn't know if she was strong enough. But she knew one thing with a clarity that felt like ice cracking. She couldn't keep building her future around someone who had chosen to leave. That night, Brooke stood at her window and watched the snow fall, the streetlights glowing like quiet hope. Her phone was still silent. Hudson was still gone. But for the first time, the silence didn't feel like a death sentence. It felt like space. Painful, empty space. But space she could fill with something new. Brooke pressed her hand to the glass and whispered, not to Hudson but to herself, "You will not be the girl who gets left and stays broken." Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. Somewhere deep inside her, that stubborn ember grew brighter. And far away in a city of cold glass and sharp edges, Hudson slept in a room that wasn't home, unaware that the woman he left behind was already learning how to rise. Brooke's first victory was small, so small no one would have called it a miracle. She woke up and didn't reach for her phone. The habit was still there, twitching in her fingers like an addiction, but she kept her hands under the blanket until the urge passed. Outside, snow drifted in slow spirals, turning the street into something soft and quiet. Her chest still ached, but it didn't crush her the way it had. She sat up and let herself breathe, just once, without checking if Hudson had decided to remember she existed. That morning, she made coffee for herself only, and the loneliness tasted different, less like punishment, more like proof she was still here. At work, the promotion application sat in her sent folder like a dare. Brooke had almost laughed while submitting it, convinced she was aiming too high. She'd always been the dependable one, the one who stayed late, fixed problems, carried what others dropped. But she'd never been the one who asked for more. Asking felt like begging, and begging felt too close to the way she'd pleaded for Hudson's truth. Now she refused to live like her value depended on someone else's decision. So when her manager called her into the office that afternoon, Brooke's hands shook, but her voice didn't. "We're considering you," the manager said. "I didn't realize you wanted to move up." Brooke lifted her chin. "I do," she answered, and something inside her stood taller. The weekend business course was held in a community center that smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. Brooke almost turned around in the parking lot. She sat in her car for 5 full minutes, staring at the glass doors, heart pounding. What was she doing here? She wasn't a businesswoman, she was just Brooke. A woman who had been left. A woman still learning how to stop bleeding in private. But then she remembered the church steps. The sentence she'd forced out through shaking lips. "I'm done waiting." Brooke exhaled and got out of the car. The cold slapped her cheeks awake. She walked inside anyway. The room was filled with people who looked like they belonged, confident, ambitious, already halfway to their dreams. Brooke sat in the back with a notebook she almost didn't open. The instructor, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, smiled at the class and asked them to write down what they wanted to build. Not what they needed, not what would make sense, what they truly wanted. Brooke stared at the blank page. Her pen hovered. For a long time, nothing came. Then slowly, words began to spill. Warm lights, a safe place, coffee, stories, a corner where people can breathe. Brooke paused, shocked by her own handwriting. She blinked hard because for the first time in weeks, the thought of the future didn't hurt. It glowed. After class, the silver-haired instructor approached her. "You didn't say much," she observed gently, "but you wrote like someone who sees something real." Brooke flushed. "It's probably stupid," she muttered. The woman shook her head. "Nothing that feels like home is stupid," she said. Then she held out a card. Martha Riley, small business mentor. "If you're serious," Martha added, "call me. Dreams don't survive in silence." Brooke's throat tightened at the irony. Silence had almost killed her. She slipped the card into her wallet like it was a match she might one day need. Brooke started taking walks at night again, not because she felt peaceful, but because movement kept her from drowning. The town looked different under winter. Streets lined with bare branches like dark lace, porch lights glowing against snow, windows fogged with warmth. She passed the empty storefront on Pine Street every time, the one with the cracked sign and dusty glass. It used to be a failed antique shop. Now it was just empty. Brooke stopped in front of it one night, staring through the window at the darkness inside. Her reflection stared back. Tired eyes, wind-reddened cheeks, hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked like a woman who had been hurt, but she also looked like a woman who was still standing. Brooke placed her palm against the cold glass and whispered, "What if you became my beginning?" The first time she told someone about the idea, it came out like a confession. Her best friend, Lila, sat at Brooke's kitchen table, stirring hot cocoa and watching Brooke's hands fidget with the mug. "A café?" Lila repeated, eyebrows lifting. Brooke cringed. "With books," she added quickly, as if it sounded less ridiculous with an extra detail. Lila's smile widened. "Brooke," she said softly, "that's the most you thing you've ever said." Brooke blinked, startled. "You don't think I'm insane?" she asked. Lila leaned in. "I think you're finally alive," she answered. And Brooke's eyes filled, not with grief, but with a fragile kind of hope. The next weeks became a blur of small steps. Brooke met with Martha, who spoke to her like Brooke was capable. Like Brooke wasn't just a woman recovering from being abandoned. Martha helped her draft a budget, outline a plan, brainstorm how to start small and grow. Brooke found herself researching coffee suppliers at midnight, watching videos about espresso machines, scribbling ideas for menu names. The work didn't erase the pain, but it gave the pain somewhere to go. Every time Brooke wanted to text Hudson, she wrote a new page in her notebook instead. Warm cinnamon rolls, poetry nights, a quiet corner for people who feel too much. Her dreams began to form a shape, and for the first time, Brooke saw a life that didn't need him to exist. The promotion came quietly, no trumpet, no grand announcement. Just a meeting, a handshake, and a new title on her email signature. Brooke walked out of her manager's office with her hands shaking and her heart pounding, with something dangerously close to pride. She sat in her car afterward and let herself smile through tears. Not because the promotion was everything, but because it proved something that pain had tried to steal. She was still valuable. She didn't need Hudson to choose her for her to matter. She had chosen herself. Brooke wiped her cheeks and whispered, "Okay, one more step." The words sounded like a promise. On a Friday night, while organizing old paperwork, Brooke found Hudson's sweater in the sealed box she'd packed weeks ago. The sight of it punched the air from her lungs. Her fingers hovered over the lid, trembling. For a second she considered putting it back, pretending she hadn't seen it. But something in her refused to be afraid of memory anymore. Brooke opened the box fully and lifted the sweater out. It still smelled faintly like him, clean soap and winter wind. Her eyes burned. She held it to her chest and let herself cry, not because she wanted him back, but because she deserved to mourn what was lost. Then, when the tears slowed, she folded the sweater neatly and placed it back in the box. "You don't get to own me," she whispered to the empty room. Not anymore. That was the night Brooke stopped dreaming of him returning. Not because she stopped loving him. Love doesn't vanish just because it hurts, but because she stopped building her survival around a fantasy. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet, and realized something terrifying. If Hudson walked in tomorrow, he wouldn't recognize the version of her he left. And maybe she wouldn't want him to. Brooke pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the steady thump of her heart. It was still beating, still fighting. She whispered a prayer that sounded like a boundary. "God, if he ever comes back, don't let me forget what I became without him." Spring was still far away, but Brooke began to plan as if it could arrive. She visited the Pine Street storefront and met the landlord, a tired man with kind eyes who seemed surprised by her seriousness. Brooke asked questions like she knew what she was doing, even though her insides trembled. She measured the space, imagined where the counter could go, where shelves could line the walls, where the quiet corner could live. She stood in the middle of the dusty room and closed her eyes. In her mind, warm lights flickered on. Coffee scent filled the air. Laughter softened the edges of loneliness. Brooke opened her eyes and saw only emptiness. But she didn't feel defeated. She felt ready. Money was the hardest part. Dreams always cost more than hope thinks they will. Brooke took extra shifts, sold old furniture, cut expenses until her life became painfully simple. Some nights she went to bed hungry, saving what she could, telling herself it was temporary. Lila offered to help, but Brooke refused. Pride and fear tangled together. She needed this to be hers. She needed to build something with her own hands, so no one could ever take it away with a single goodbye. The exhaustion was brutal, but it was clean. It didn't feel like humiliation. It felt like effort. And effort, Brooke realized, was love you give to yourself. One evening, Brooke stood outside the storefront with a set of keys in her hand, staring at the metal like it was a weapon and a blessing. Martha stood beside her, wrapped in a scarf, smiling. "This is the part where most people back out," Martha said. Brooke laughed shakily. "I might still," she admitted. Martha's gaze sharpened. "No," she said gently. "You won't. Because you're not building a cafe. You're building a home for the version of you who almost didn't survive." Brooke's throat closed. She slid the key into the lock with trembling fingers. The door clicked open and cold air poured out like the building was exhaling after years of silence. Brooke stepped inside. Her footsteps echoed. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like potential. Renovation was messy and slow. Brooke learned to sand wood, to paint walls, to fix small leaks with YouTube tutorials playing on her phone. She laughed at herself more than once, covered in dust, hair a disaster. Some days she worked so hard her hands cramped, then cried in the bathroom because exhaustion always makes grief louder. But she kept going. Lila helped on weekends, bringing music and terrible jokes, turning labor into something almost fun. Martha stopped by with advice and coffee, steady as a lighthouse. Brooke began to realize she wasn't alone. Not really. Not anymore. The world had not ended when Hudson left. It had simply forced her to find new routes. The first time she hung string lights along the ceiling, something in her chest broke open. The little bulbs glowed warm against the bare walls, turning dust into gold. Brooke stood in the middle of the space and watched the light flicker softly, and tears slid down her cheeks without permission. It was beautiful. Not perfect. Nothing in her life had been perfect. But beautiful in the way survival is beautiful. She whispered, "Thank you," to no one and everyone. Maybe to God. Maybe to the girl she used to be. Maybe to the pain that had pushed her here. Outside, snow started falling again, as if winter itself was returning to witness her beginning. Opening day came on a quiet Monday morning with snow dusting the sidewalks like powdered sugar. Brooke stood behind the counter with her hands shaking, apron tied too tight, heart pounding so loud she thought customers might hear it. The first person through the door was an elderly woman who smiled at Brooke like she'd been waiting for this place her whole life. "It's cozy," the woman said, looking around. Brooke's throat tightened. "That's what I wanted," Brooke whispered. More people came, slowly, steadily, drawn by warmth and curiosity. Some bought coffee, some browsed books, some simply sat and breathed. Brooke watched them and felt something settle inside her. She had created a refuge. She had created a life, and she had done it while her heart was still healing. That night after closing, Brooke sat alone in the quiet corner, lights dim, snow falling outside the window. She held a mug of tea in both hands, letting warmth seep into her fingers. The café was silent now, but it wasn't the kind of silence that destroys. It was the kind that protects. Brooke stared at the street, at the glow of the streetlights on snow, and felt peace brush against her ribs like a shy thing. She whispered, barely audible, "You came back too late." Not to Hudson, but to the version of herself who had waited at the window. Then she smiled, small, real, and added, "And I'm still here." She didn't know it yet, but far away, Hudson was lying awake in a Chicago apartment, staring at the ceiling, haunted by a warmth he could no longer reach, and a name he could never forget. The town didn't change fast. It never had. Seasons came and went like familiar songs. Winter, thaw, bloom, and back again. But Brooke's little cafe made something in Main Street feel brighter, as if warmth had learned a new address. People began to speak of it like it was a person. "Have you been to Brooke's place? You should go. She makes the best cinnamon rolls. It's peaceful in there." Brooke didn't realize she was becoming a landmark until strangers walked in and smiled like they already trusted her. She learned their names. She learned their favorite books. She learned that some people didn't want coffee. They wanted to be seen. She named the cafe Second Light without telling anyone why. When Lila asked, Brooke just shrugged and said, "Because everyone deserves another chance to feel warm." The truth sat deeper than that. Second Light was what she had become after the first light went out, after Hudson. She painted the walls a soft cream, strung fairy lights across the ceiling, and built a quiet corner with 2 armchairs and a shelf of poetry. Above the corner, she hung a small framed quote in tidy handwriting. "You can begin again." Customers read it and smiled. Brooke read it when her chest tightened, and it reminded her she hadn't survived for nothing. Her promotion at work became more than a title. It gave her stability, health insurance, steady income, the kind of security Hudson's leaving had stolen from her. For a while, she lived 2 lives. Spreadsheets by day, espresso and books by night. She was exhausted. Her hands were always dry from cleaning. Her back ached. Some mornings she drank coffee like it was medicine, but she never once thought about quitting the café. Because the café wasn't a hobby. It was proof. Proof that she could build something no one could abandon her out of. Proof that she could be the kind of woman who didn't fall apart just because someone else chose to leave. The first time someone called her boss, Brooke laughed as if it was a joke. She looked behind her, expecting someone more qualified. But the young barista she'd hired, Sadie, a college student with bright eyes and heavy debt, was serious. "You're my boss," Sadie said. "And you're kind. That's rare." Brooke's throat tightened. Kindness had once been her weakness, people told her. Too soft, too forgiving, too trusting. Yet here it was, feeding people, employing people, creating a place where broken hearts could breathe. Brooke realized something slowly and painfully. Kindness wasn't weakness. It was power when you stopped giving it to those who didn't value it. Some nights after closing, she sat alone in the quiet corner and listened to the cafe settle. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the wood, the soft glow of lights against winter-dark windows. In those moments, Brooke felt the ache of Hudson like a scar you touch by accident. It didn't bleed anymore, but it reminded her the wound had been real. She had stopped checking her phone. She had stopped imagining his footsteps on the porch. But sometimes when a customer walked in with a familiar cologne, her heart still jolted. She hated herself for it. Then she breathed and reminded herself, healing doesn't erase love. It just teaches love where not to live. Brooke never spoke Hudson's name. Not to Lila, not to Martha, not even to herself out loud. She treated him like a storm that had passed, something you respect, something you remember, but not something you chase. If people asked if she was dating, she smiled and said, "I'm busy building a life." It wasn't a lie. She was building a life so full that loneliness didn't echo so loudly anymore. She took weekend hikes with Lila. She attended poetry nights at the library. She volunteered once a month at the shelter, serving soup with sleeves rolled up and heart open. Brooke wasn't hiding. She was living. And living had slowly become her rebellion. In the third winter after Hudson left, Second Light hosted its first Stories by Firelight night. No fire, just candles and warm lamps, because the building couldn't handle a real fireplace. People gathered with blankets and mugs, reading poems, sharing small stories of love and loss. Brooke didn't plan to speak. She stayed behind the counter, smiling, refilling cocoa, letting other people's words fill the room. But halfway through the evening, an older man with tired eyes stood and said, "I didn't think I'd survive my wife's death." The room went still. But this place, this warmth, reminded me I'm still here. Brooke's hands froze on the mug. Her throat tightened. The man looked at her with gratitude so deep it felt like prayer. And Brooke had to turn away so no one would see her cry. Later that night, Martha found Brooke in the back room wiping tears with her sleeve. "You did that," Martha said gently. Brooke shook her head. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. Martha stepped closer. "You built a place where pain doesn't feel ashamed," she replied. Brooke's lips trembled. "I didn't mean to." Martha's voice softened. "Sometimes the thing meant to break you becomes the thing that teaches you how to heal others." Brooke squeezed her eyes shut, letting that truth land. She thought of Hudson for the first time in weeks, not with longing, but with a strange, distant gratitude. Not for what he did, never that, but for what she became when she refused to let it destroy her. That same week, Brooke received a letter in the mail with unfamiliar handwriting. No return address. Her stomach tightened as she held the envelope, fingers suddenly cold. She stared at it for a long minute in the cafe office, the hum of the lights above her loud in the silence. The envelope wasn't sealed carefully. It looked like it had been opened and closed again, as if whoever sent it had changed their mind 3 times. Brooke slid her finger under the flap and pulled out a single piece of paper. Her eyes skimmed the first line, and the world tilted. It wasn't Hudson's handwriting, but the name on the last line was familiar. Callahan. Brooke read it twice, then a third time, because disbelief makes you reread pain like it might change. The letter was from Hudson's mother. It wasn't long, just a few sentences. Apology, regret, a confession that made Brooke's chest ache. He never stopped caring. He just never knew how to come back. Brooke's fingers tightened around the paper. Her throat burned. She wanted to crumple it and throw it away. She wanted to scream at a woman who had known where her son was while Brooke was slowly dying of questions. But then she read the last line again. "He's not okay, Brooke." Not really. Brooke's breath hitched and her heart did something she hated. It softened. She folded the letter and placed it in her drawer without answering. Brooke didn't owe anyone comfort. She didn't owe Hudson's mother her peace. Still, the letter followed her like a shadow for days. At odd moments, while steaming milk, while restocking books, while walking home under streetlights, Brooke would remember those words. "He's not okay." She told herself it wasn't her problem. She told herself Hudson had chosen his life. But the truth was cruel. Brooke had never stopped caring about the boy she loved. She had only learned to care from a distance. Caring from a distance was the only way she survived. In Chicago, Hudson sat in an apartment that looked like a hotel room. Expensive, clean, empty. The windows were tall, showing a city of cold glass and constant motion. He should have felt proud. He had everything he'd chased. Promotion, money, status. A father who finally nodded like Hudson had earned a scrap of approval. Yet every night Hudson lay awake with his chest tight, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. He dreamed of Brooke's kitchen, cinnamon in the air. He dreamed of her laugh. He dreamed of her eyes the night he left, wide with betrayal and love. He woke up sweating, ashamed, and still alone. Hudson tried dating. He tried distraction. He tried drowning guilt in work until days blurred into years. Women smiled at him in restaurants. They held his hand in fancy hotel lobbies. They praised his success. None of it touched him. Because none of them were Brooke. None of them made him feel like he was more than a resume. And deep down, Hudson knew he didn't deserve Brooke, not after what he did. But guilt isn't the same as healing. It's just pain that keeps repeating. Hudson was haunted by the same question. What if she never recovered? The thought made him sick. Then one day his mother called and said a sentence that changed everything. "She's not broken anymore." Hudson laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "What do you mean?" he asked. His mother hesitated. "She opened a café," she said softly. "A little place on Pine Street. People love it." Hudson went still. The phone pressed to his ear felt suddenly too heavy. "A café," he repeated, as if the word didn't belong in the same world as Brooke's tears. His mother continued gently. "It's warm. It's her." Hudson's throat tightened. He imagined Brooke smiling at strangers, Brooke handing out warmth to others, Brooke living without him. And for the first time in years, something inside Hudson cracked. Not from grief for himself, but from the brutal truth that she had survived the thing he thought would destroy her. That survival was beautiful, and it almost ruined him. That night, Hudson pulled out the envelope he'd kept sealed all these years. The one he couldn't send, the one he couldn't throw away. His hands shook as he stared at it on the kitchen counter. He remembered holding it the night he left, telling himself he'd send it when things calmed down, when he was stronger, when he could explain. But days became weeks, and weeks became years, and the shame grew teeth. Hudson's chest burned. He pressed a palm against the envelope like it was a heartbeat. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty room. Then he did something he had avoided for years. He opened his laptop and typed her name into a search bar. The screen loaded slowly, as if the internet itself knew it was about to deliver a verdict. Then it appeared, a photo of a storefront with warm lights glowing against snow. A sign above the window, simple, painted with care. Second light. Hudson stared at the picture until his eyes blurred. He clicked another image. Brooke behind the counter smiling as she handed a cup of coffee to an elderly woman. Her hair was tied back. Her sleeves were rolled up. She looked alive. Not the girl he left trembling in a doorway. A woman who belonged to her own life. Hudson's breath shook. His stomach rolled. That was the moment he realized the cruelest part of his punishment. Brooke had become everything he once promised to help her become, without him. He shut the laptop with trembling hands, stood abruptly and paced the apartment like a man looking for an exit from his own mind. His heart thudded hard against his ribs. He felt panic rising, not the kind that comes from danger, but the kind that comes from truth. If he went back, he might destroy her peace. If he stayed away, he would die with regret rotting inside him. Hudson leaned against the wall and slid down to the floor, burying his face in his hands. For a long time, he didn't move. Then in the quiet, he heard Brooke's voice in his memory, gentle but firm. "Talk to me. I'm not your enemy." Hudson's shoulders shook. "I was my own enemy," he whispered. And the sentence tasted like confession. 2 days later, Hudson requested time off. His father scoffed. "For what?" he demanded. Hudson swallowed, spine rigid, voice steadier than it had been in years. "To fix something I broke," he said. His father laughed, cold and dismissive. "There's nothing to fix. The past is the past." Hudson's jaw tightened. For the first time, he didn't shrink. "No," he answered quietly. "The past is the reason I can't breathe." His father's eyes narrowed, but Hudson didn't care. That night, Hudson packed a bag. He held the sealed envelope in his hands like a weapon against his own cowardice. Snow began to fall outside his window, soft, relentless. Hudson stared at it, and for the first time in years, he let the truth take shape. He was going back, not to be forgiven, not to be loved, but to finally face Brooke, and face himself. Hudson crossed the state line at dawn, the sky a pale gray that looked like the world hadn't fully decided to wake up. Snow followed him in soft sheets, blurring the road ahead like a warning. His hand stayed tight on the wheel, knuckles white, stomach twisted into a knot that never loosened. He had rehearsed 100 speeches, but every sentence sounded weak the moment he tried to say it out loud. "I was scared. I was pressured. I thought I was protecting you." None of it mattered. Because the truth was simple, brutal, undeniable. He left. And Brooke paid for it. The town appeared slowly, as if it was rising out of the snow rather than sitting on the earth. Hudson passed the familiar bridge, the river dark beneath ice, streetlights glowing in that warm amber haze that always made winter feel almost romantic. Almost. His chest tightened as memories crashed into him. Brooke's laughter, her hands around a mug, her voice in the dark saying, "Talk to me." He swallowed hard. The car felt too warm, too silent, too full of ghosts. Hudson turned onto Maple Street, heart pounding, because his body still believed that if he went to the old house, she might be there. Waiting. Like his sin hadn't changed her. When he reached the house, he froze so completely he forgot to breathe. The porch light was off. The curtains were gone. The mailbox had a different name. A crooked "For Rent" sign leaned in the snow like a final verdict. Hudson stared at it until the world blurred at the edges. This wasn't supposed to happen. In his mind, Brooke had been frozen in time, hurt, yes, but still there, still within reach, still in the life he left behind. The empty porch told him the truth he'd avoided for years. She had moved on, and he had missed the years he could never get back. Hudson stepped out of the car, boots crunching into ice. The cold slapped his face awake, but it didn't clear the fog in his head. He walked up the steps anyway, as if standing at the door might undo the past. He lifted a trembling hand to knock, then stopped, realizing how insane it was to knock on a stranger's life. His throat burned. The envelope in his coat pocket felt like a stone. Hudson turned away, swallowing humiliation and fear, and looked up the street. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe a sign, maybe a punishment, maybe nothing. Instead, he saw it. A soft golden glow down the road, warm against the white snow like a heartbeat in the dark. A door creaked nearby. Hudson turned as an older man stepped onto the porch next door, a scarf wrapped around his neck. The man squinted, studying Hudson the way small towns study strangers. Then his expression shifted. Recognition, not surprise. "Well," the man said, voice low. "Look who decided to show his face." Hudson's stomach dropped. "You know me?" he asked. The man gave a short, humorless laugh. "Hard not to," he replied. The girl cried for months. Hudson's chest tightened. The words hit like a fist. "Where is she?" Hudson asked, voice cracking despite his effort. "Where's Brooke?" The neighbor's gaze stayed hard. "Not here," he said bluntly. Hudson swallowed, breath visible in the cold. "I can see that," he whispered. "I mean, where did she go?" The man pointed down the street toward the glow. "You'll find her where the warmth is," he said. Hudson followed the direction with his eyes. The light was coming from a storefront window, a place that looked alive. Not fancy, not polished, just warm. Hudson's throat tightened. "Is she okay?" he asked, hating how small his voice sounded. The man stared at him for a long beat. "She's more than okay," he said. "She's the kind of okay you don't get to be after what you did." Hudson's lungs felt tight. "Does she hate me?" he asked. The question tasted like fear. The neighbor's face softened, just slightly. "No," he said quietly. "And that's what should scare you the most." Hudson stood there like he'd been struck. Hate meant she still belonged to the pain. Peace meant she had left him behind. Hudson nodded once, stiffly, as if his body was the only thing still functioning. Then he turned and walked toward the golden light. Each step heavy, each breath shallow, the snow crunching beneath him like a countdown. The closer he got, the more the smell reached him. Coffee and cinnamon drifting through the cold air like a promise. The sign above the window came into view, painted simply, lovingly. "Second light." Hudson stopped in the snow and stared at the words until his eyes burned. Second light. Another chance. A life after darkness. He didn't deserve those words. Not after leaving her in the dark for years. His chest squeezed so hard he thought he might be sick. He imagined Brooke naming this place, choosing hope as an act of defiance. He imagined her hands painting the letters. Hudson pressed a palm to his sternum as if he could hold his heart in place. It was beating too fast, like it knew this moment could destroy him. Through the window, he saw silhouettes. People seated, laughing softly, holding mugs with both hands. Warm light wrapped around them like protection. Hudson realized he had never created warmth like this in his own life. His Chicago apartment was cold glass and clean silence. His success had been sterile. Brooke had built something alive. Hudson's throat tightened. He couldn't decide if he felt proud of her or shattered by what it proved. Probably both. He stepped closer and looked through the glass again. And then he saw her. Brooke stood behind the counter with her sleeves rolled up, hair loosely tied back, cheeks flushed from work. A pen was tucked behind her ear. She smiled at someone across the room, and the smile didn't look forced. It looked real. Hudson's breath caught so hard it hurt. His mind flashed backward to the last time he'd seen her, standing in a doorway with tears spilling, begging him to stay. The contrast punched the air from his lungs. This woman looked like she belonged to herself, like she had learned peace without him. Hudson's vision blurred. He swallowed, jaw tight, because he didn't know if he could survive seeing what he had lost. He stood outside for a long time, frozen in more than one way. The cold seeped into his bones. His fingers went numb. Yet he couldn't move. Walking in meant facing the truth he'd avoided for years. Walking away meant proving he still hadn't changed. Hudson closed his eyes. In his pocket, the envelope felt like a blade. He thought of his father's laugh. He thought of his mother's trembling voice. He thought of Brooke's prayer he'd never heard. "God, don't let this destroy me." Hudson exhaled shakily. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm finally here." Then he opened his eyes, reached for the door, and stepped inside. A bell chimed softly above him, warm sound, cold night. Heat hit his face, carrying cinnamon and coffee, and for a second he almost flinched like he didn't deserve warmth. The café was small but beautiful. Bookshelves lined one wall, fairy lights glowing overhead, candles flickering on tables. A framed quote hung above a cozy corner. "You can begin again." Hudson's throat tightened. The words felt like a cruel joke and a holy invitation at the same time. People glanced at him, then looked away, not realizing they were witnessing a man walking into his own reckoning. Hudson stood near the door, heart hammering. trying to breathe like his lungs remembered how. Brooke was laughing softly as she wiped the counter. The sound struck Hudson like lightning. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just warm. The kind of laugh that comes from someone who isn't scared anymore. Hudson took one step forward, then another. His boots left small wet marks on the floor from melting snow. He didn't know what to do with his hands. He didn't know where to put the regret that felt too big for his body. Brooke turned slightly, reaching for a stack of napkins, then paused as if the air had changed. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes met his. And time did something strange. It slowed, thickened, pressed down on the room until Hudson could barely breathe. Brooke didn't drop anything. She didn't gasp. She didn't step back like she'd seen a ghost. She simply looked at him, calm and steady, as if she'd imagined this moment and survived it already. Hudson's mouth opened, but no sound came. His heart thudded once, heavy like a door closing. Brooke blinked slowly, then said his name like a sentence ending. Hudson. The way she said it hurt more than anger ever could. Hudson nodded stiffly, his throat burning. Brooke, he managed, voice hoarse. Her gaze didn't soften. It didn't harden either. It simply stayed true. The kind of truth you can't argue with. Hudson took a shaky breath. I came back, he whispered. And the words sounded stupid the moment they left him. Brooke's lips pressed together and something like sorrow flickered behind her eyes. Quick, controlled. I can see that, she said quietly. Hudson reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the envelope with trembling fingers. It looked old, worn, carried too far. He held it out like an offering, like a weapon, like proof of his cowardice. I wrote this, he said, barely audible. A long time ago. His voice broke. I never sent it. Brooke's gaze dropped to the envelope, then lifted back to his face. For a moment, her eyes looked tired. Not weak, not broken. Just tired in the way strong people get tired from carrying things alone. She didn't reach for the envelope. She didn't move at all. You should have, she said softly. And the words hit harder than any slap. Hudson's chest tightened. I know, he whispered. He stopped himself. No excuses. Not here. Not now. He swallowed hard. I'm sorry, he said instead, voice trembling, eyes burning. I'm sorry for leaving you in the dark. Brooke stared at him for a long beat, and the cafe around them continued to breathe. Mugs clinking, someone turning a page, the soft hum of life. Finally, Brooke spoke, voice low enough that only he could hear. Do you know what you did to me? She asked. Hudson's throat closed. He shook his head once, helpless. Brooke's eyes didn't waver. Then you don't get to say sorry yet, she whispered. Not until you understand. Hudson felt the floor tilt. His stomach dropped like he was falling. Brooke stepped out from behind the counter, slow and measured, and for a second Hudson's heart leaped with foolish hope, until she stopped at a distance that made her boundary clear. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of years. You came back too late, she said. Not loud enough for the room, but loud enough for his soul. Hudson's breath shattered. He stood there holding an unsent letter like a broken man holding a worthless shield. Brooke watched him with calm that felt like judgment and mercy braided together. And Hudson realized the truth with a pain so sharp it almost stole his vision. He had returned to ask for a second chance. But Brooke had already built her second light without him. And now, if he wanted any place in her life at all, he would have to earn it, one faithful, fearless step at a time. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The cafe kept living around them. Soft chatter, spoons clinking, pages turning. Like the world refused to stop just because Hudson's heart was collapsing. Brooke's calm made him feel exposed, like every weakness he'd hidden behind success was suddenly visible. He stood with the envelope still in his hand, arm half extended, like a man offering something too late to matter. Brooke glanced at it one more time, then looked away as if even the sight of it cost her energy. She turned her head toward the back hallway and nodded once, small and controlled. Come, she said. Not an invitation. A decision. Hudson's feet obeyed before his pride could speak. He followed her behind the counter, past the espresso machine, past the shelves of cups, past the little chalkboard menu written in neat handwriting. Every detail stabbed him softly. She built this. Without me. Brooke pushed open a door that led into a narrow office lit by a single lamp. A small desk. A stack of invoices. A framed photo of Brooke with Lila and an older woman Hudson didn't recognize. Martha, he guessed, smiling like family. Brooke didn't offer him a seat. She leaned against the edge of the desk with her arms folded, posture steady. Hudson stood in the center of the room like a boy called into the principal's office. The air smelled like paper, coffee, and something sharp. Truth. You shouldn't have come, Brooke said quietly. Hudson's throat tightened. I had to, he answered, voice hoarse. Brooke's eyes held his. No, she corrected gently. You didn't. That's the thing. The sentence hit him like ice water. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't punishing him with drama. She was simply stating reality. Hudson swallowed hard. I'm here now, he whispered. Brooke tilted her head slightly. And what do you want, Hudson? She asked. Her tone was calm, but the question carried years. Hudson opened his mouth and felt the uselessness of words. I want to make it right, he said finally, and he hated how small it sounded. Brooke's gaze didn't soften. Make it right, she repeated, like she was tasting whether it was real. Then she pushed off the desk and walked to the window, staring out at the snow-lit street. Do you know what you did to me? She asked again, without turning around. Hudson's hands curled into fists. He shook his head once, ashamed. I think I do, he whispered. Brooke exhaled, a sound that almost became a laugh but died before it could live. No, she said. You think you do, but you don't. Hudson's chest tightened. Tell me, he pleaded, and the word felt like breaking glass. Please, tell me. Brooke stared at the streetlight for a long moment, as if gathering herself from a place she never wanted to revisit. When she spoke, her voice was low and even, controlled in the way people are controlled when they've had to survive their own emotions. The first week after you left, she began, I kept thinking something terrible happened to you. Hudson's throat closed. Brooke continued, eyes still on the window. I convinced myself you were in a hospital, that you'd been kidnapped, that you were hurt. Her fingers tightened around the windowsill. Because the truth, she paused, swallowing. The truth that you chose to disappear felt too humiliating to believe. Hudson's eyes burned. He tried to speak, but Brooke held up a hand without turning, a quiet command for silence. I drove to your office, she said. I asked your mom. I waited. Her voice didn't rise, but each sentence landed heavier than the last. And every time someone looked at me with pity, I felt smaller. Brooke's breath shook once, then steadied. I started wondering what was wrong with me, what I did. Hudson flinched. Brooke turned slightly, just enough for him to see her profile. Strong, composed, but there was a tremor in her jaw. Do you know what it feels like, she asked, to question your worth because someone couldn't even give you a goodbye? Hudson's chest ached like it was splitting. Brooke, he started. She turned fully now, eyes sharp. No, she said, not harshly, just firmly. Not yet. Hudson swallowed the words. Brooke moved closer, stopping a few feet away. Close enough for him to feel the warmth of her presence. Far enough to remind him he didn't have access. You left in the middle of the night, she said, voice steady. You let me wake up to an empty house. Her eyes didn't blink. Do you know how long I sat by that window? How many times I stared at my phone waiting for it to light up? Hudson's throat tightened. Brooke's lips pressed together. I became someone I hated. She whispered, a woman begging for crumbs of truth. The word crumbs gutted him. Hudson's breath shuddered. I'm sorry, he whispered, and the apology sounded like ash. Brooke's eyes softened for half a second, then hardened again with resolve. I'm not telling you this to break you, she said quietly. I'm telling you because you don't get to step back into my life unless you understand the cost. Hudson nodded, swallowing hard. I want to understand, he said, even if it destroys me. Brooke studied him as if testing whether his pain was real or performative. Then she spoke again, lower now. There was a night, she said, when I drove to the river. Hudson went still, Brooke's eyes remained steady, and for a moment I understood why people stopped trying. Hudson's face drained of color. "Brooke," he breathed, horror curling through the syllables. Brooke lifted her chin slightly. "I didn't," she said. "I stayed." Her voice didn't shake, but something in her eyes went distant. "But you should know you pushed me close." The room felt smaller. Hudson's hands trembled. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her, to erase that night from her memory with touch. But he didn't move. He didn't deserve to. He let the truth stand between them like a wall he built with his own cowardice. Tears burned behind his eyes, and he blinked them back, because he had no right to ask her to comfort him now. Brooke walked back to the desk and picked up a pen, turning it slowly between her fingers like she needed something solid to hold. "And then," she said, voice quieter, "I got angry." Hudson's jaw tightened. Brooke's mouth curved into a sad, bitter smile. "Not the kind of angry that screams," she added. "The kind of angry that goes silent and dangerous." She tapped the pen against the desk once. "I stopped believing in love," she said. Hudson's breath caught. Brooke lifted her eyes to him. "I stopped believing in myself." Her gaze sharpened. "Do you understand what you stole?" Hudson nodded once, slow. "Yes," he whispered. "I stole your safety." Brooke stared at him as if that answer surprised her. Then she exhaled, and something in her shoulders loosened, just slightly. "Second light," she said, gesturing faintly toward the café beyond the door. "That place isn't just a business." Hudson followed her gesture, throat tight. "It's the reason I'm alive," Brooke whispered. "It's what I built so I would never wait at a window again." Hudson's eyes burned. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth in every line of her face. Strength carved by pain. Peace earned, not given. Hudson's voice shook. "I'm proud of you," he said, "and I hate myself for not being there." Brooke's eyes flickered, but she didn't let emotion win. "Pride isn't what I need," she said quietly. "I needed honesty. I needed closure. I needed a partner who didn't run when things got hard." Hudson swallowed. "I know," he whispered. Brooke's face softened for a second. Then she lifted her chin. "So tell me," she said. "Why?" Hudson froze. The question sat between them like a loaded gun. The real answer. The thing he'd spent years avoiding. Hudson's throat tightened. He stared down at his hands, then back at her. "Because I was scared," he said, voice raw. Brooke's eyes narrowed. "Of what?" she asked. Hudson's jaw clenched. "Of not being enough," he admitted. "For you. For my father. For the life I was told to live." Brooke's gaze didn't change. "So you punished me for your fear," she said, calm but devastating. Hudson flinched. "Yes," he whispered. "And it was wrong." He took a shaky breath. "My father gave me an ultimatum," he continued. "Chicago, the promotion, the approval." His laugh was bitter. "He told me I was wasting my future here." Hudson's eyes lifted to Brooke, and they were wet now, unguarded. "And I believed him," he said. "I believed that if I chose you, I'd fail. And if I chose him, I'd survive." He swallowed hard. "I didn't understand that leaving you would make me a failure anyway." Brooke stared at him for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and measured. "You don't get to rewrite what happened," she said. "You don't get to pretend you left for some noble reason." Hudson nodded, tears slipping down despite his fight. "I'm not pretending," he whispered. "I'm confessing." Brooke's eyes held his, and for the first time he saw a crack in her composure. Not weakness, but truth. "I loved you," she said, and her voice trembled just slightly. "And you left like I meant nothing." Hudson's breath broke. "You meant everything," he choked out. "And that's why I was afraid. Because you were the one thing I couldn't control." Brooke's jaw tightened. "Love isn't control," she said. Hudson nodded. "I know that now," he whispered. "I didn't then." He wiped his face with the back of his hand, ashamed of tears that felt too late. Then he did the only thing he could do without asking her to carry him. He straightened. He swallowed. He faced her. I'm not asking you to forgive me today, he said firmly. Brooke's eyes narrowed slightly as if listening for manipulation. Hudson kept going. I'm asking you to let me prove it, he said. Let me stay here. Let me do the work. Let me earn back even the smallest piece of trust. His voice cracked. Even if you never choose me again. The words hung in the air. Brooke studied him as if she was searching for the old Hudson, the one who ran the moment emotions got sharp. She didn't see him. Not fully. But she saw something else. A man standing still in discomfort. A man not escaping. Brooke exhaled slowly. You can't earn what you destroyed with grand gestures, she said. Not with money. Not with gifts. Not with speeches. Hudson nodded. I know, he said. Brooke's eyes stayed steady. You earn it with consistency, she continued. With presence. With patience. With truth. Hudson's voice was quiet. Tell me what to do, he said. And I'll do it. Brooke's gaze sharpened. First, she said, you stop treating my pain like a hurdle you have to get past so you can feel better about yourself. Hudson flinched, then nodded. Okay, he whispered. Second, she continued, you don't touch my life unless I invite you. Hudson swallowed. Okay. Brooke stepped closer, her eyes bright with hard-earned boundaries. And third, she said softly, you don't disappear again. Hudson's throat tightened. I won't, he promised. Brooke shook her head once. Don't promise, she said. Prove. Hudson nodded, jaw clenched like a man making a vow inside his bones. I will, he said quietly. I will prove it. Brooke opened the office door and stepped back into the café, the warm noise wrapping around them again. She moved behind the counter like nothing had happened, picking up a cloth to wipe a clean surface because strength, Brooke had learned, looked like normalcy. Hudson stood there, awkward in the doorway, the envelope still in his hand. Brooke didn't look at him as she spoke the final sentence of the night, her voice low so only he could hear. If you're staying in this town, she said, then you start by being useful without being seen. Hudson's pulse pounded. Useful without being seen. A test. A boundary. A chance. Hudson swallowed hard and nodded once. Okay, he whispered. And as he stepped back out into the snow, the warmth of the cafe behind him, he realized something terrifying and hopeful at the same time. Brooke wasn't giving him forgiveness. She was giving him a door, barely cracked open. And if he pushed too hard, it would close forever. But if he learned how to stay, he might finally become the man she could love without fear. Hudson didn't sleep that night. He lay in the small motel room he'd rented on the edge of town, staring at the ceiling as snow tapped lightly against the window. Brooke's words replayed over and over. You came back too late. Make me understand. Prove it. Each sentence landed like a weight on his ribs. His instinct, his old instinct, was to run from discomfort, to escape the shame by leaving before he could fail again. But this time, he stayed. He sat up, pulled the envelope from his bag, and stared at it until dawn. Then he whispered, no more disappearing, like a vow carved into bone. In the morning, he didn't go to second light. Not yet. He remembered Brooke's boundary. You don't touch my life unless I invite you. So he started where he could, at the hardware store, buying tools he didn't even know how to use properly. He asked the clerk for the best ladder, the safest snow shovel, the kind of salt that wouldn't ruin stone steps. The clerk looked at him strangely because men like Hudson didn't usually ask questions. Hudson didn't care. He walked out with arms full of supplies and a mind full of one goal: make her life easier without demanding her attention as payment. That afternoon, when the streets were quiet and the cafe signs still glowed faintly from inside, Hudson walked behind the building and found the back steps coated in ice. He worked silently, shoveling snow, scraping ice, laying down salt in careful lines. His fingers went numb through gloves, but he kept going. He fixed a loose railing he'd noticed the day before, tightening bolts until the wood stopped wobbling. He didn't go inside. He didn't announce himself. He finished the work, stepped back, and stared at it like it was a confession written in labor. Then he left, heart pounding, as if he'd just done something braver than any boardroom decision. Brooke discovered it the next morning when she came in early. Sadie was already there, eyes wide. "Did you do this?" Sadie asked, pointing at the cleared steps, the tightened railing, the neat salt lines. Brooke blinked, surprised. "No," she said slowly. Sadie frowned. "Then who?" Brooke's stomach tightened because she already knew the answer. She stepped outside, boots crunching softly, and inspected the work. It was careful, thoughtful, done by someone who wanted her safe. Brooke's throat tightened. She hated that it warmed something in her chest. She hated that her mind immediately pictured Hudson's hands, red from cold, doing this for her in silence. Brooke didn't say anything when Hudson walked into the cafe later that day. He kept his distance near the counter like a polite stranger, eyes lowered, hands in his pockets. Brooke served him like any customer because she refused to let him hijack her peace. "What can I get you?" she asked, voice calm. Hudson looked up, and the rawness in his eyes almost made her flinch. "Coffee," he said quietly. "Whatever you recommend." Brooke nodded once. She poured, careful and steady. When she slid the cup across the counter, their fingers didn't touch. Hudson swallowed, then added softly, "The back steps." "I did that." Brooke's jaw tightened. She didn't thank him. She only said, "Good." But her eyes flickered, just once, and Hudson felt it. The smallest crack in the wall. Hudson kept showing up in small ways. He replaced a broken light bulb outside the cafe without asking. He left a box of new napkins when Sadie mentioned they were running low. He shoveled snow from the sidewalk in front of Second Light before dawn, disappearing before Brooke arrived. He asked Martha for recommendations on reliable electricians and paid for a safety inspection anonymously. And when Brooke found out, through Martha's reluctant confession, she confronted him, voice quiet but firm. "You can't buy my forgiveness." Hudson's face tightened. "I'm not buying," he said. "I'm repairing." Brooke's eyes narrowed. "Repairing doesn't erase," she warned. Hudson nodded. "I know," he whispered, "but I'm still going to do it." News travels fast in small towns. Within a week, people began to notice Hudson. Not because he demanded attention, because he didn't. But because he looked like trouble and acted like humility, and that contradiction makes people curious. Customers whispered when he stepped in, "Isn't that Callahan's son? What's he doing here? Is he back for her?" Brooke pretended not to hear, but the whispers crawled under her skin. She had built Second Light to be a refuge. She refused to let Hudson's return turn it into a stage. So when Lila found her in the back room, tense and quiet, Brooke snapped, "I won't let him ruin this." Lila's voice softened. "Then don't," she said. "Make him earn the right to even exist near your peace." Hudson's father arrived 2 days later, and the timing felt like a test sent straight from hell. A black SUV parked on Main Street like a threat. The man stepped out in a tailored coat, face sharp as winter itself. He walked into Second Light as if it belonged to him, scanning the room with cold disapproval. Brooke's stomach tightened as she watched him approach the counter. "You're Brooke?" he said, not a question. Voice clipped. Brooke's chin lifted. "Yes," she answered. The man's eyes narrowed. "My son is wasting time here," he said flatly. Brooke's hands stayed steady on the counter. "Your son is an adult," she replied calmly. The man's mouth tightened. "He has obligations," he snapped. Brooke's eyes sharpened. "So did I," she said. "He didn't care about mine." The cafe went quiet around them, the air suddenly heavy with other people's curiosity. Hudson emerged from the back hallway, having heard the tone of his father's voice like an alarm. He froze when he saw him. The old Hudson might have shrunk, might have apologized, might have tried to calm the storm by sacrificing Brooke again. But this Hudson did something different. He stepped forward, shoulders squared, and placed himself, not in front of Brooke like she needed saving, but beside her, like a partner would. "Dad," Hudson said quietly. The word sounded like steel. "Leave." His father's eyes widened slightly. "Excuse me?" Hudson didn't flinch. "You heard me," he said. "You don't get to walk into her place and speak to her like that." Brooke's pulse hammered, but her face stayed calm. Hudson's father scoffed. "This is exactly what I mean," he said, gesturing at Brooke like she was a distraction. "You're throwing away your future over a woman who—" Hudson's voice cut through the room, sharp and controlled. "Stop," he said. Silence snapped into place. Hudson's eyes burned as he stared at his father. "I threw away my future when I left her," he said, voice low. "I'm not doing it again." His father's jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic," he sneered. Hudson shook his head once. "No," he replied. "I'm being honest." Then he turned slightly toward Brooke, not asking permission, not forcing emotion, just grounding himself in reality. "This is her business," he said to his father. "Her peace. If you can't respect it, you don't belong here." For a moment, Brooke forgot to breathe. She didn't need Hudson to fight her battles. But something about the way he faced his father, without anger, without cruelty, without hiding, hit her in a place she didn't expect. Because it wasn't about defending her. It was about owning what he'd done. His father's eyes narrowed, scanning the cafe, noticing people watching. "Fine," he said coldly. "Enjoy your little redemption story." Then he leaned close to Hudson and murmured something only Hudson could hear. Hudson's face tightened. His father straightened and left, the bell above the door chiming sharply behind him. The warmth returned slowly, but the room felt altered, like everyone had just witnessed a man choose something he'd never chosen before. After the cafe emptied, Brooke found Hudson outside by the back steps, hands in his pockets, staring at the snow. His shoulders were rigid. He looked like a man bracing for impact. Brooke didn't know why she followed him. Maybe because she needed to understand what had changed, or maybe because she needed to see if it was real. She stopped a few feet away, maintaining distance. "What did he say to you?" she asked quietly. Hudson's jaw clenched. "That I'll regret this," he answered. Brooke's eyes narrowed. "Will you?" she asked. Hudson looked at her then, really looked, and something raw flickered in his eyes. "I regretted leaving you every day," he said softly. "This is the first thing in years that doesn't feel like regret." Brooke's throat tightened, but she refused to let emotion take the wheel. "One good moment doesn't erase years," she said. Hudson nodded. "I know," he whispered. "That's why I'm not asking for a moment. I'm asking for a process." Brooke studied him, searching for the old Hudson, the one who ran the instant life got uncomfortable. She didn't see him. She saw a man standing in cold air, staying anyway. Her chest ached in a strange way. Brooke exhaled slowly. "If you're going to stay," she said, "you start by being consistent." Hudson's voice was steady. "I will," he said. Brooke lifted her chin. "No disappearing," she added. Hudson's eyes didn't waver. "Never again," he said. The next week tested them both. A rumor spread, one of those small-town whispers that grow teeth. Someone said Hudson was back because he wanted to buy Second Light. Someone said Brooke was dating him for money. Someone said she'd always been waiting and now she'd won. Brooke heard the gossip and felt something hot rise in her chest. Anger, humiliation, old pain resurfacing. She'd fought too hard to be reduced to a story people could judge. That night, she sat alone in the cafe office staring at the framed quote, "You can begin again." Her hands trembled. She wanted to quit. She wanted to shut down Second Light and disappear the way Hudson once did. But she pressed her fingers to her pulse and whispered, "No." She refused to let people's opinions steal her peace. Hudson found out about the rumor when a man at the diner smirked and said, "So when you buying her little shop?" Hudson's jaw tightened. The old Hudson might have ignored it. The new Hudson stood up, voice calm but dangerous. "You're not going to talk about her like that," he said. The diner went quiet. The man laughed. "Relax. It's a joke." Hudson leaned in slightly. "Then stop joking about a woman who rebuilt her life while you watched," he replied. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The man looked away, embarrassed. Hudson left money on the table and walked out, heart pounding. Not from fear, but from the strange strength of finally doing what should have been done years ago. Protecting her dignity, not his image. That evening, Hudson waited outside Second Light until closing, keeping his distance like a man who understood boundaries. Brooke locked the door and saw him under the streetlight. snow drifting around his shoulders. Her heart did a stupid, unwanted thing. It jumped. Brooke steadied herself. She walked toward him, keys tight in her hand. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Hudson's eyes held hers. "I heard what people are saying," he said quietly. Brooke's jaw tightened. "Let them talk," she replied. Hudson shook his head once. "No," he said. "Not if it hurts you." Brooke's eyes narrowed. "And what are you going to do?" she asked, challenging. Hudson swallowed. "Whatever you tell me to," he answered. "But I won't stay silent while they rewrite your story." Brooke stared at him, snow clinging to her lashes, breath visible between them. She hated how much she wanted to believe him. She hated how tired she was of being strong alone. Brooke exhaled, long and shaky. "I don't need a hero," she said quietly. Hudson nodded. "I know," he replied. "You never did." His voice softened. "I just want to be the man who doesn't add to your pain." Brooke's throat tightened. For a second, she saw him not as the man who left, but as a man trying to return with humility. It scared her more than anger, because hope is always the most dangerous thing. Brooke's voice came out low. "Then don't rush me," she whispered. Hudson's eyes didn't blink. "I won't," he promised. A long silence stretched between them, thick with winter and unfinished history. Brooke's fingers tightened around her keys. "There's something you need to know," she said suddenly, voice quiet. Hudson's stomach dropped. "What?" he asked. Brooke swallowed, eyes flicking away for the first time. "When you left," she whispered, "I found out something, and I never told you." Hudson's breath caught. "What did you find out?" he asked, voice strained. Brooke's eyes returned to his, and there was fear there, not of him, but of the memory. "I was offered a job in Chicago," she said softly. "A job I would have taken, if you had stayed." Hudson went still, as if the snow itself had frozen inside his veins. Brooke's voice trembled. "And I didn't go," she added, "because you left me before I could choose." Hudson's face drained of color, and the truth hit him like a wrecking ball. He hadn't just abandoned her. He had stolen a future she was ready to build with him. Hudson's mouth opened, but no words came, and Brooke turned away, walking into the night, leaving him under the streetlight with a regret so heavy it almost dropped him to his knees. Hudson didn't move for a long time after Brooke walked away. Snow gathered on his shoulders like quiet judgment, and his breath came in short bursts that burned his throat. Chicago. The word echoed through him like a siren. She had been offered a life, a real opportunity, a future, and he had stolen her choice by leaving before she could decide. Hudson pressed a hand to his face, fingers trembling. He wanted to chase her, to explain, to beg, old instincts rising like panic. But Brooke had asked him not to rush her, so he stayed where he was, swallowed the urge to make it about his pain, and let the truth crush him properly, because that's what accountability feels like when you stop running. The next morning, Hudson went to the post office before sunrise and mailed the envelope, unopened, unsent for years, addressed to himself, not to Brooke. He didn't deserve to hand her words that had rotted in silence. If the letter mattered at all, it would be as proof of what he used to be, a man who hid behind paper instead of showing up in flesh. He walked out into the cold with the receipt in his pocket like a small funeral. Then he went to Second Light, early before the city fully woke, and waited outside without knocking. He kept his hands visible, posture calm, eyes down. When Brooke arrived, keys jingling, she stopped at the sight of him. Hudson didn't step closer. He only said, "Can we talk? Just 5 minutes, and if you say no, I'll leave." Brooke's eyes narrowed, wary. Her breath fogged in the air as she studied him like a woman who had learned not to mistake desperation for change. After a beat, she nodded once and unlocked the door. Inside, the café smelled like yesterday's cinnamon and tomorrow's hope. Brooke flicked on the lights, then turned to face him. 5 minutes, she said. Hudson nodded. "Thank you," he replied, and the gratitude sounded real, small, not performative. He didn't ask for a hug. He didn't try to make her smile. He simply stood there, letting silence exist without escaping it. "I didn't know," Hudson said finally, voice hoarse. "About Chicago." Brooke's jaw tightened. "No," she replied. "You didn't. Because you didn't ask me anything. You just left." Hudson nodded slowly, swallowing. "You're right," he said. Brooke's eyes sharpened, bracing for excuses. Hudson didn't give her any. "I'm not going to defend myself," he continued. "I'm just going to say what's true." His throat tightened. "I took your choice away," he said, "and I'm sorry for that in a way I can't explain." Brooke's gaze held his, hard and bright. "Sorry doesn't give me those years back," she said quietly. Hudson nodded. "I know," he whispered. "That's why I'm not asking for the years. I'm asking for the chance to be different now." Brooke's arms folded over her chest. "Different how?" she asked. Hudson inhaled slowly, steadying himself. "By staying," he answered. Brooke's eyes narrowed. Hudson kept going, voice quiet but solid. "Not staying like a man who shows up when it's convenient," he said. "Staying like someone who chooses you even when it costs him." Brooke's expression flickered, not softened, but affected. "Costs you?" she echoed. Hudson nodded once. "My father came here because he's scared," Hudson said. "Not of you. Of me changing." Brooke's jaw clenched. "He doesn't own you," she replied. Hudson's eyes lifted. "He did," he admitted. "For too long." Then his voice steadied with a decision. "He doesn't anymore." Brooke stared at him, and the silence in the cafe felt enormous. Finally, she said the sentence that had been sitting behind her eyes for weeks. "What do you actually want from me, Hudson?" Hudson's heart pounded, but he didn't move closer. He didn't reach for her. "I want to earn a place beside you," he said. "Not in front of you, not above you, beside you." Brooke's throat tightened. She looked away for a second, blinking slowly. When she looked back, her voice was low. "You can't earn your way back into my life with money," she reminded him. Hudson nodded. "I know," he said, "so I'm not going to try." He swallowed. "I'm going to give you what I never gave you before." Brooke's eyes narrowed. "What?" she asked. Hudson's answer was simple. The truth, and the choice. He reached into his coat pocket, not for the old envelope, not for a gift, but for his phone. He unlocked it and turned the screen toward her. Brooke stiffened. Hudson's voice shook slightly, but he held steady. "My father offered me a new contract," he said. "More money, more influence, but it comes with one condition." Brooke's eyes flicked up. "What condition?" Hudson's jaw tightened. "That I cut ties with this town," he said. "With you. That I go back and pretend this never happened." Brooke's face went still. Hudson's thumb hovered over the screen. "I haven't answered him," he said, "because I'm not doing it unless it's my choice." He looked at her. "And I'm not making that choice without you knowing the truth." Brooke's pulse pounded, visible in the tightness of her jaw. "Why show me this?" she asked, voice sharp with fear. Hudson's eyes held hers. "Because I'm done leaving you in the dark," he said. "Done making decisions that destroy you and calling it love." He swallowed. "I want you to see what staying cost me," he admitted. "Not so you'll feel guilty. Not so you'll choose me out of pity." His voice cracked. "But so you'll know I'm not pretending anymore." Brooke stared at the phone, then back at his face. "And what are you going to do?" she asked. Hudson's breath shuddered. "What I should have done years ago," he whispered. "Choose you. Even if you don't choose me back." Then Hudson did something Brooke wasn't expecting. He stepped back, creating more space, not less, like he was handing her power instead of taking it. "You said you were offered Chicago," he said softly. Brooke's throat tightened. "Yes," she replied. Hudson nodded slowly. "If you still want it," he continued, "I'll help you get there." Brooke blinked, shocked. "What?" Hudson's voice was steady, even though his eyes were wet. "If your dream was Chicago," he said, "I won't be the reason you stay." Brooke's breath caught. Hudson shook his head once, pained. "I've taken enough from you," he whispered. "So I'm giving you back your choice." Brooke stared at him as if he'd spoken another language, because that wasn't the Hudson who left. That was a man trying to love without control. Brooke's eyes filled and she turned away fast. As if tears were a weakness she refused to hand him. "You don't get to come back and play savior," she whispered. Hudson didn't flinch. "I'm not," he said quietly. "I'm trying to be accountable." Brooke swallowed hard. "You think offering me Chicago fixes what you did?" she asked, voice trembling now. Hudson's throat tightened. "No," he replied. "Nothing fixes it." He inhaled shakily. "But maybe it honors what you lost." Brooke's shoulders rose and fell with a breath that sounded like war. She turned back, eyes bright. "I don't want Chicago anymore," she said suddenly. Hudson froze. "You don't?" Brooke's voice cracked slightly. "No," she whispered, "because I built this." She gestured to the café, the lights, the books, the warmth. "This is my life." Her jaw tightened. "The job was a door," she said. "Second light became a home." Hudson's eyes burned. "Then I won't ask you to leave it," he whispered. Brooke stared at him, heart pounding, and for the first time, the question behind her pain rose fully into the air. "Why now?" she asked. "Why didn't you come back sooner?" Hudson's face tightened with shame. He looked down, then up again, eyes unguarded. "Because I was afraid you'd be gone," he admitted. Brooke's lips parted in disbelief. Hudson's voice broke. "And I couldn't handle being the villain in your healed life," he confessed. "So I stayed away and called it respect, when it was really cowardice." Brooke's breath shook. Hudson took a step back again, not forward, because he wasn't trying to win. He was trying to tell the truth. "But then my mother said you were okay," he whispered. "And I realized, your healing didn't erase my responsibility. It proved it." Brooke stared at him for a long moment. Something in her expression softened. Not fully, not easily, but enough to hurt. "You should have been brave when it mattered," she said quietly. Hudson nodded, tears sliding down now. "I know," he whispered. "I failed you." Silence stretched between them, thick with the years they couldn't redo. Then Brooke exhaled and said something that sounded like surrender and strength braided together. "I'm not the girl you left," she whispered. Hudson shook his head. "I know," he said softly. "And I'm not the man who left you." Brooke's eyes narrowed. "Then prove it," she said. Hudson nodded once, jaw clenched. "I will," he promised. "With my life if I have to." Brooke's gaze dropped to his phone still in his hand. "Call him," she said suddenly. Hudson froze. "Now?" he asked. Brooke's eyes lifted. "Now," she repeated. "If you're serious about staying, you choose it in front of me." Hudson's heart slammed against his ribs. This was it. The moment that wasn't a speech, wasn't a gift, wasn't a performance. It was a decision. Hudson swallowed hard and hit call. The phone rang once, twice. Brooke stood still, arms folded, breathing shallow. Hudson's father answered on the third ring, voice cold. "Hudson." Hudson's voice was steady. "I'm not coming back," he said. Silence. Then his father laughed softly. "You'll regret this." Hudson's jaw tightened. "I already regret leaving," he replied. "I'm done regretting the wrong thing." His father's tone sharpened. "This town made you weak," he snapped. Hudson's eyes flicked to Brooke, not for permission but for grounding, and then back to the phone. "No," he said firmly. "This town showed me who I really am." His father scoffed. "And that woman?" He sneered. Hudson's voice dropped, dangerous and calm. "That woman rebuilt her life after I tried to ruin it," he said. "You will not speak about her again." His father inhaled, furious. "You're throwing away everything." Hudson's voice didn't waver. "I'm choosing everything," he corrected. Then with a steady thumb he ended the call. The cafe was silent, the lights humming softly overhead. Hudson's hands trembled, not with fear, but with the shock of finally cutting the chain. Brooke stared at him, eyes bright, chest rising and falling. She didn't smile. She didn't applaud. She simply looked like a woman watching a man do the one thing she had needed years ago. Choose her openly. Hudson swallowed hard, voice quiet. "I'm staying," he said. Brooke's jaw tightened. "This doesn't mean I forgive you," she whispered. Hudson nodded. "I know," he replied. Brooke stepped closer, just one step. closing a fraction of the distance. "But," she started, and the single word made Hudson's breath catch. Brooke's eyes held his. "That was the first time I believed you. The days that followed were not magic. They were work. Hudson got a job in town. Nothing glamorous, just honest. He helped at the shelter on Saturdays, keeping his head down, letting service teach him humility. He spent mornings fixing small things around Second Light only when Brooke allowed it, always asking, always waiting for permission. He showed up to stories by firelight night and sat in the back, listening, not taking space. When Brooke had hard days, he didn't demand conversation. He simply stayed near enough to be reliable, far enough to be safe. And slowly, Brooke's shoulders stopped tensing when she heard the bell above the door. Slowly, her body began to believe what her heart wasn't ready to admit. Hudson was still here. One evening after closing, snow began falling again. Soft, familiar, forgiving. Brooke stood outside locking the door, breath fogging the air. Hudson waited under the streetlight like he always did, hands in his pockets, posture calm. Brooke looked at him for a long moment, eyes tired. "I hate that part of me still loves you," she whispered. The confession sounded like defeat, but it wasn't. Hudson's throat tightened. "I won't ask you to hide that," he said softly. Brooke's eyes filled. "I'm scared," she admitted. Hudson stepped closer, slow, careful, stopping when he was close enough to be felt, not close enough to trap. "Then let's be scared with truth," he whispered. "No more darkness." Brooke swallowed. "If I forgive you," she said, voice shaking, "it has to be because you changed, not because I'm weak." Hudson's eyes burned. "You were never weak," he said. "You were the strongest person in every room I ever walked into." Brooke stared at him, and the snow fell between them like quiet grace. Then she lifted a trembling hand and touched his cheek, just once, like testing if he was real. Hudson didn't move. He didn't lean in. He let her lead. Brooke's eyes searched his face, and something inside her finally unclenched. "I don't want to keep carrying this alone," she whispered. Hudson's breath shattered. "You won't," he promised softly. Brooke stepped closer, and this time she didn't stop. Their foreheads touched first, gentle, reverent, like a prayer instead of a kiss. Hudson's hands hovered at her waist, waiting for permission. Brooke nodded almost imperceptibly, and he held her carefully, like love was something sacred and breakable. When their lips finally met, it wasn't desperate. It was quiet, warm, a second light. Snow swirled around them under the street lamp, and for the first time in years, Brooke didn't feel like she was waiting for love. She felt like she was choosing it, on her terms, without fear. Winter didn't end overnight. It never does. But something in Brooke finally did. Something heavy, something old, something that had been living in her chest like a locked door. It opened, not because Hudson returned, not because he cried, not because he begged, but because he stayed. He stayed through the awkward mornings when Brooke didn't know how to look at him without remembering the girl she used to be. He stayed through the nights when the town whispered and tried to rewrite her story. He stayed through the days when she flinched at the sound of a car outside, a reflex built from abandonment. He stayed through the moments when she went quiet, when her fear returned like winter wind. Hudson didn't fight her fear. He honored it. And slowly, Brooke's body started believing what her mind couldn't accept for years. This time, he wasn't leaving. Spring arrived quietly, like a shy apology from the sky. Snow melted into silver streams along the sidewalks, and the town began to breathe in color again. Second Light changed with the season. Fresh flowers on the tables, brighter pastries in the display case, laughter spilling out of the door like sunshine. And one afternoon, Brooke found Hudson in the quiet corner reading a book he didn't understand just because he wanted to understand her. He looked up when she approached, eyes gentle, steady, no panic, no desperation, no pressure. "Hey," he said softly, like her peace was something sacred. Brooke sat across from him and watched his hands, how they didn't shake anymore when he was near her, how he didn't grab, how he didn't demand, how he had learned the holy language of patience. "I got a call from Chicago," Hudson said quietly. Brooke's heart tightened, but not the way it used to. What did they want? She asked. Hudson exhaled once. A final offer, he admitted. More money, bigger title, a life that looks perfect from far away. Brooke held his gaze, steady as the woman she had become. And? She asked. Hudson's answer didn't come with drama. It came with certainty. I told them no, he said. Not because I'm trying to prove something anymore, but because I finally know where I belong. Brooke blinked slowly, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was being chosen instead of something. She felt like she was being chosen as something, as home, as worth it. Hudson reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. No flashy box, no crowd, no performance. Just a simple keychain with a tiny metal tag engraved with 2 words. Second Light. I had it made, he said, voice low, because I wanted you to know, I'm not here on borrowed time. I'm here for real. Brooke's throat tightened. Hudson swallowed, eyes wet but steady. I can't fix the past, he whispered. But I can spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel alone in the dark again. Brooke stared at the keychain, then at him. And the strangest thing happened. The pain didn't scream, it didn't rise like a wall. It softened, like a scar finally realizing it had survived. She reached across the table and took the keychain, fingers brushing his. This time she didn't pull away. I don't need perfect, Brooke whispered. I need present. Hudson nodded once, like he understood love for the first time. Then I'll be present, he promised. Every day, even when it's hard. Brooke's eyes filled. You already are, she whispered. Later that night after closing, Hudson waited under the street lamp like always. Only this time, Brooke walked into his space without fear. He didn't move too fast. He didn't rush. He just opened his arms like an offering. Brooke stepped into them and felt the truth settle into her bones. This wasn't the love that left. This was the love that learned to stay. Hudson kissed her forehead first, gentle, reverent. Then her lips warm and slow, like a promise that didn't need loud words. As the wind moved through the street, Brooke looked up at the sign above the café, Second Light, and smiled through quiet tears. Because Hudson came back too late, but God didn't. And the miracle wasn't that he returned. The miracle was that she rose, and still chose love, without losing herself. If this story reminded you that the right love won't make you beg, it will learn to stay, then don't leave without joining our family. Subscribe now and comment, I choose love, so I know you stayed until the very end. And if you've ever been left in the dark, share this story with someone who needs their second light today.